What's up, everybody? It's Jason Cruz here once again with another episode of the Legal Submission. And this one's a big one because we are talking about the settlement that went down earlier this week in which TKO Group Holdings settled with the Kung Lee plaintiffs and the Cajun Johnson plaintiffs in their respective lawsuits. As we know, the trial was set to begin April 15th in the Kung Lee case. The parties had gone to private mediation to try to hammer a settlement out. And on March 13th, according to the SEC filings filed by TKO, the parties agreed to a $335 million settlement in which it would pay the fighters in installment payments. From what we understand, two payments or multiple payments done over installments of later this fall and one again in 2025. Now, the lawsuit is over, and as we know by now, we don't know any of the settlement details. And again, it has to be cleared by a court of law by Judge Richard Boulware. The settlement has to be finalized and agreed to by the parties and Richard Boulware. He has to sign off on it, but as far as we know, all of the dates have come off the calendar. There's nothing pending regarding the motions or anything like that. We assume that everything is going to be agreed upon and certified by the court. Winners and losers. So obviously the big issue was whether or not one of the parties would lose, what would be the outcome. Now, for TKO, both parties would face some rash decisions if they had lost. For TKO, they would have the prospect of treble damages upon the money damages proven by the plaintiffs and accepted by a jury. So a jury would have to agree that the damages presented by the plaintiffs at trial was sufficient, and then it's possible that those damages would be trebled pursuant to the Antitrust Act. Now, from plaintiff's perspective, if they lost, this is a 10-year investment, so to speak, for the plaintiff's firm, and if they lost, they would eat a lot of the costs that they expended throughout this case. Now, the costs would be paying for the experts. They had multiple experts, filing fees, travel costs, just the daily lunches, things of that nature. Those things would have been eaten up by the firm, meaning that the firm would not seek to give the bill to the former fighters saying, hey, you have to pay this. Now, the settlement money will come, the settlement money, the plaintiffs will take a portion for the cost to reimburse them, and as well as a reasonable legal fee, whatever that may be. And again, this would have to be agreed upon by the court. So who won and who lost in this case? And I will give you the lawyer answer, and it just depends. Now, if you are in belief of a lot of the people, and if you look at Mark Hunt's tweet he had sent after hearing of the news, in which he blamed the lawyers for taking the money and not going forth with the alteration of the MMA business, you would say that Zuffa won. Their stock was up after news of the settlement hit. There was little to any real PR damage. The UFC's business, if we are assuming the TKO earnings reports filed with the SEC is correct, they have had a banner 2023. There has been a little, if any, there has been a little murmurings about what would happen if they had to pay a huge settlement, a huge jury verdict. So if you were thinking $1 billion or treble that, $3-4 billion, that would really hurt the business of Zuffa. What would hurt even more is if a court of law forced them to alter contracts or alter their business practices, to which they would hurt their bottom line. So it's all about the bottom line. So the fact that they paid him out 335 million is actually a good outcome for Zuffa. And now, if we think about it, now the Major League Wrestling filed a lawsuit against WWE for antitrust violations, and I had indicated that particular lawsuit was not very good for MLW to prove it at time of trial. Yet, WWE paid them $20 million according to SEC filings to settle the case. $20 million. And here we see Zuffa paying $335 million to the plaintiffs in this particular lawsuit. And the money will be dispersed. However, it will be to the fighters, the 1,200 or so within the class. A little asterisk there. If you are really staunch and forthright about this, you could possibly opt out of the settlement and fight Zuffa on your own. But of course, like I said, you would have to find your own lawyers, pay for them, and that is just a hurdle that is too hard to overcome. What have we learned? Well, we learned that it's antitrust lawsuit takes a long time. I think the class action certification was overly drawn out. I think Judge Boulware did not do the fighters a service by extending that period of time to wait for the Tuna case to make his decision. I also think the pandemic hurt. That's a year or so where the courts were down and backlogs occurred, and that probably hurt that particular prospect of trying to see this case go forward. I think that we also know that the UFC's business model will maintain and actually is likely to be adopted by other promotions. UFC said in one of its filings that other promotions, such as just throwing it out there, a One or a Bellator or the PFL, and mainly it's just the PFL now, utilize similar contracts to the UFC. Similar contracts meaning that these contract clauses that we've seen that restrict the mobility, allegedly, of fighters. Champions clause, a right to match clause, things of those nature, the things of that nature restrict the mobility of fighters. And then the particular issues related to the fact that the UFC dangles fights for fighters with the proviso that they signed a longer term contract. Now, Nate Diaz has talked about that as he was led into his last fight, that he would get a Conor McGregor fight, according to Nate Diaz, if he signed an extension with the UFC. He didn't want to do that, and as you recall, his fight that he was going to have for his last fight was going to be Khamzat Chimaev. And fortunately, I guess for Nate, Chimaev was hurt, and then Tony Ferguson stepped in. So there are those issues of the business practices of the UFC that will still be maintained. And the unfortunate thing about this is that later on, down the road, after this money has been spent and dispersed, the business practices, the unsavory business practices alleged by the plaintiffs will still go on. Pay has gotten better over time. If you adopt the wage level analysis of the Zuffa experts, but again, the inability for the fighters to come together and as a collective bargaining unit to ask for better wages and insurance and better rights. Those things aren't happening anytime soon for the fighters, unfortunately. And I think this lawsuit at least brought attention to the plight of former fighters. The unfortunate thing about this is that this lawsuit will just be another blip on the spectrum of MMA business. It will be, it will. I think people will learn from the lawsuit, but what will they learn will be that it takes a long time to sue people. And it takes a long time for the UFC to take down the UFC, as the plaintiffs' attorneys attempted to do. And you may look to other avenues as far as trying to make change in the business of MMA, whether it is through the amendment of the Ali Act, which I advocate for, or a collective bargaining unit, or a union, or an association, or something of that matter. That will be the only ways to affect change. And the structure of the MMA business as it is makes it hard. Just makes it hard. So what can we see in the future? Hopefully for the MMA fighters affected by this part of the class, they will be able to obtain a nice settlement, hopefully do something with it, whether it's investing or pay for bills or pay for, just the general life. That would be great. As far as the business of the UFC, this is just a minor blip on their budget, and it is still churning along, making a lot of money for itself. And again, we still see that a portion of revenue for the fighters being lower than other organizations. Probably have more to talk about this in the future as we get news of the settlement as it starts to come out. This is Jason Cruz for MMA Payout the Legal Submission. Have a good one.